Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 301. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, January the 28th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Did you miss the podcast last week? Well, sorry about that, but I was on holiday. And I'd halfway thought about doing a podcast while on vacation, but I decided that podcast would have to be done in the hotel room. And since the weather every day that the trophy wife and I were in Puerto Rico was sunny and 85, I think that, or I thought that time would be best spent outdoors. And it was. So no podcast last week, but we'll talk about what I did last week. This week, topic of today's podcast, dual topics. First of all, the Puerto Rican adventure that we went on last week. I'll talk a little bit about that, about Puerto Rico, what it's all about, how it's different, how it's just different. It's part of the United States, but it's not a part of the United States. It's tropical paradise, but there's a dark side to that paradise as well. The weather this time of year is absolutely perfect, and there's no asterisks there. It's just the weather is just perfect, which is why I enjoy going to Puerto Rico. It's my third time there. And just a few things about how Puerto Rico, the good, the bad, and some of the ugly about Puerto Rico. I'll talk about that in detail. Also, a topic, I may have touched on it before, but not in this respect. It has to do with an editorial I read by Fay Vincent, of all people. He was a former commissioner of baseball, and he's all but retired now. He's 85, so you would think that he's probably not working a whole lot. But it's Fay Vincent has an interesting look on life, and the piece that he wrote was called "Mind Your Own Garden." And I understand the demographics of this show are range from the middle age to the older to the flat out old. Okay. Yeah, we have some young folks that listen to the podcast, but I would say probably, if I'm looking at my Spreaker demographics, probably 80%, 75% anyway, of my podcast listeners are probably 50 or older. Okay. Which means about 25% are 50 or younger. So there's a different way that people of a different age look at life. I think as you get older, maybe you scratch your head a little bit more. Mainly, I think because the changes that are going on in our world today really don't include you. But I'll talk about that and give you some examples of that as well. First off, the Puerto Rican adventure. I'm not going to say it was an impromptu trip to Puerto Rico because, as I've said before, my goal in life, and I almost always accomplish that goal, is an adventure of a lifetime 3 times a year. We're just in early January, mid-January, I guess, when we left. So that was adventure number 1. And we had planned on going someplace in the Caribbean, maybe Miami, probably not Miami, probably someplace in the Caribbean or Mexico we had planned on going. And that's married together with the trip we have planned in July. It's our 40th anniversary, and once every 10 years, I take the trophy wife wherever she wants to go in the world to do whatever she wants to do in the world. Okay, she's put up with me for 10 years, so she gets that. So good for her. And she wanted to go on a river cruise in Europe, so we booked that. Now, when we booked that, Europe was desperate for tourists. That was close to a year ago we booked that thing. Okay, maybe 8 months ago anyway. But back then, Europe was hurting for tourists. Now, Europe is the hottest tourist spot on the planet, and the prices have certainly changed. But we got in under the radar. So this trip we're taking in July actually came with free airfare, okay? So the price was, I thought, reasonable anyway for 8 days touring down the Danube going from near Munich, Germany to Budapest, Hungary. Actually 6 days on the boat, 2 days in Budapest. I thought the price was fairly reasonable. And then they threw in free airfare. Well, here's why that changed things. For the past 6-7 years, I've been saving my American Airlines frequent flyer miles so that we could fly first class to and from Europe for our European vacation. Well, guess what? They included airfare free with this trip, so I didn't have to blow the points on that. So instead, we flew to Puerto Rico. Now, the difference in flying to Puerto Rico on points and flying to Europe on points, the airline is called American Airlines for a reason. They fly in the Americas. They're big, flying to North America, Central America, South America, and of course the Caribbean. And to book a first class ticket, actually to book a coach ticket it was 50,000 miles for both of us, 25,000 miles apiece. For an extra 1,250 miles, we got to fly first class. So I had planned on spending upwards of 250,000 miles to fly on American Airlines to Europe. For less than half of that, for way less than half of that, we flew to Puerto Rico first class, okay? So not only did we fly first class for free, I've got all kinds of points. We could do it again if we wanted to, and probably will sometime the next year or two. So the flight was, first of all, if you've ever flown first class, or I think a lot of times they call it business class now, but first class and business class are very similar. Business class is what first class used to be. On some airlines, first class is you get your own suite, okay? It's ridiculous. But you get the big comfy seat, you get the drinks, you get the meal, you get the concierge service, you get all that kind of good stuff when you fly first class. Most important, you get the big comfy seat where you're not crammed into the airplane like a sardine can, okay? You can board when you want, you get a drink or two. First class, business class is, if you can afford it, if you can get away with it, it's the only way to travel, especially on a longer flight. And we flew from St. Louis to Charlotte to San Juan. St. Louis to Charlotte's just about an hour and 15 minutes, not a big deal, but Charlotte to San Juan is a 3-hour plus flight. That's a long time to be in an airplane if you're in a cramped seat. Not so bad if you're in a nice, big, comfy seat. And every airplane we had was they were all Airbus planes, which always, when you fly an Airbus plane on American Airlines, you have to hold your breath because there's two types of Airbus planes, and they're 300 series Airbus. There's two types of Airbus planes you fly with American Airlines. The one are the new Airbus planes they bought. And they bought a bunch of new Airbus planes a while back. They're very nice. They're comfy. They're clean. They're modern. They're very cool. They're on the same lines of a 737 MAX. Okay. Around the same, modern planes, wonderful planes. And that's the one we got on 3 of the 4 legs. One of the shorter legs on the way home from Charlotte to St. Louis, we got the other kind of Airbus. And that was the Airbus left over from the old U.S. Air days. If you remember, U.S. Air bought American Airlines. It wasn't the other way around, folks, because American was sinking and U.S. Air was doing well. They had cash, so they bought American Airlines. But they dumped the U.S. Air name and picked up the American name. So even though they're now called American Airlines, they're like the joint venture between U.S. Air and American. U.S. Air was the one with the money, but American was the one with the name that everybody wanted. So bottom line is, on the last leg home from Charlotte to St. Louis, we got one of the old, worn-out, dilapidated U.S. Air Airbus planes, which sure was a big, comfy seat, but my seat was broken. It smelled. We're on our way home, so it was no big deal. I'm not going to complain. But anyway, it was a wonderful flight. The thing about Puerto Rico, sunny and 85 degrees every day. There was a little bit of rain the last day we were there, but I mean, we checked out of the hotel at 1 o'clock anyway, so it didn't really matter a whole lot. But that's why you go to Puerto Rico this time of year. It's going to be sunny with maybe some rain off and on. It's going to be between 80 and 85 degrees every single day. And low humidity, by the way. You don't get that stifling Caribbean humidity in the wintertime. Our hotel accommodations, we stayed at the Embassy Suites just outside of San Juan in a neighborhood called Isla Verde, Green Island. It's about 6 miles from Old San Juan, still in the San Juan metro area. Think if you're staying in St. Louis, picture, okay, you're not in St. Louis per se. You're staying in Shrewsbury, okay? It's that close. It's part of the San Juan metropolitan area. And we stayed in an Embassy Suites hotel because they're nice, they're fine. It's a Hilton property, so I got it free on points. You can see where I'm going here. Free hotel, free airfare, so it didn't cost me that much. But Embassy Suites are nice hotels. You get free breakfast, you get a free happy hour. The rooms are comfortable. It's a Hilton property, so they're going to do things right. Nice hotel, close to everything. And like I said, the weather, that's the reason you go someplace like that this time of year, was absolutely, positively perfect. This is my third trip to Puerto Rico, and I really want to like Puerto Rico. And every time I go, I make a little adjustment, and I like it a little bit more. But there's some things about Puerto Rico that are not so good. The main thing is that place needs to be totally revamped. They have no money in that place. It's U.S. territory, but it's not a state, so they don't get so much government bailout. The people are poor. There's really not much industry in Puerto Rico. It's kind of odd because they have rich farmland and not many farms. They have lots of ocean here in the Caribbean, but not many fishermen, which is kind of strange to me. Okay, they import basically everything that they have. In fact, I eat fish every night for dinner. That fish was probably imported. Red snapper, mahi-mahi, they don't catch it on the island. They don't have a fishing industry there. Now, that's not to say people don't go out and fish and catch stuff for themselves, but they don't have a farmer's market where they sell fresh fish. They don't have a processing station. They don't have a fleet of boats that go out and come back in. They don't have that, okay? So the biggest thing with Puerto Rico is everything is stupid expensive because they have to import it into the country, okay? And it's bad enough that you have to bring everything in on a boat or a plane because that's expensive, but there's an old law, about 100 years old. It's called the Jones Act, okay? And it was a protectionist act put in 100 years ago, maybe more. And basically it says, look, if you're going to ship something from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, it has to be done on a U.S. flagged vessel that was built in the United States that has a crew of American citizens on it, which 100 years ago, that was no big deal. It was a big union protectionist thing. Problem is right now is of all the boats and ships that operate in the U.S. area, about 2% fit that criteria. Translation, it costs a whole lot more to import stuff into Puerto Rico. In fact, if you ever see, offer, free shipping, but offer not good in Alaska, Hawaii, or Puerto Rico. And the reason is because of the Jones Act. Now, Alaska, you could transport stuff via plane or train, rather, if you had to. Hawaii, a lot of stuff just comes from Asia because Asia is at least as close as the U.S. Puerto Rico, you're going to import stuff in from Latin America, which doesn't have a ton of stuff to import for you because they're not modern countries, or from the U.S., and you're going to pay a lot of money via the Jones Act. So everything's expensive. And the people are poor. So when you take somebody who earns less than normal and the prices are higher than normal, that's what you get. You get a very poor economy. That being said, statistics about Puerto Rico are interesting because if you compare Puerto Rico to, say, any other of the 50 states, they are dead last, okay? Mississippi is the poorest state, lowest income, most poverty. Puerto Rico is way behind Mississippi. However, when you turn that around and say, okay, let's not compare Puerto Rico, or let's not say Puerto Rico is a state. Let's say Puerto Rico is an independent country. You compare it to any other country in Central America or the Caribbean, it's number one. Nothing else is close. So they're not a first world country. It's almost like it's the United States, but it's a second world country, okay? To give you an idea of how old things are and how they need to be redone in Puerto Rico, the manhole covers, and I need to post this on my Facebook page. In fact, I'm going to do this right now. I'll do this after the podcast. But the manhole cover in Puerto Rico has a foundry name on it, and the name of the foundry in which it was made. In fact, if you walk around and look at manhole covers, you'll see Neenah Iron Works, Neenah, Wisconsin. If you're down in the southeast, a lot of times there's a big foundry down in southern Florida. You'll see it's called the Miami Foundry. You'll see a lot of stuff there. There's a foundry in several in Alabama. You'll see those. A lot of stuff comes from India now. A lot of foundries in India. But usually a manhole cover has the foundry in which that manhole cover was made, okay? The manhole covers in Puerto Rico, the vast majority of them say Foundry San Cubano. In other words, they came from a foundry in Cuba. Now, why is that odd? Well, it's been against the law to import anything from Cuba into anything in the United States since the early 60s, 61, 62, ever since Castro took over. So those manhole covers were imported into Puerto Rico sometime before the early 1960s. Now, to be fair, manhole covers really don't wear out. But these things have been walked on, and they're just rounded over like a like an old, quarter from the 1950s, okay? So that's how old the stuff is in Puerto Rico, and everything just needs to be repaired. But they don't have the tax dollars to do that. The territory they filed for bankruptcy not too long ago. They got some money for COVID, so they're currently running a balanced budget, but that's not sustainable. They had some industry down there with the pharmaceutical and medical industry because there was some type of a law that allowed businesses to operate tax-free, but that expired. It wasn't renewed, so now it's just more expensive, and a lot of those pharmaceutical companies have pulled out. So Puerto Rico is still, it's a difficult place in which to maneuver and get around. The first time we went to Puerto Rico, I stayed, it was a company I used to work for, and we went there on a sales conference. It was on a beautiful complex, but they said you can't leave the complex. Why can't you leave the complex? Well, simple. It's dangerous. In fact, we wanted to take our bicycles out and ride them around in the backcountry, and they said, "Nah, we don't want those bicycles to be stolen." We told the guy, "Look, we came here on a plane. We're not going to steal your stupid bicycles. What are we going to do? Put it in our checked luggage and take it home?" They said, "Nah, we're not worried about that. We're worried about you get outside the gates and someone beats you in the head and steals your bicycle and your money, maybe your life." So it wasn't safe outside of the compound. Second time we went to Puerto Rico, took the whole family, and we stayed in Dorado, which is about half an hour from San Juan, in a golf resort, okay? The only problem with that golf resort, it was at least half empty with vacant houses, which means the city surrounding it, the restaurants were half closed. So there wasn't much to do outside of the hotel. Third time, much better. Stayed just outside of San Juan. I mean, we could have stayed in Old San Juan itself, but that's really expensive. Points needed to stay in Old San Juan. I think it was 60,000 points to stay at the Embassy Suites per night. They wanted 180,000 points to stay at the Hilton in Old San Juan. So 3 times the points. Didn't want to use up all my points on that trip. So, but there's a bus you can take a bus. You can take Ubers. You can get around just fine, relatively inexpensively. So, will I go back to Puerto Rico? Yeah. And actually, I'll probably stay in the same place and do the same thing. Is this a place I want to spend a month at a time in the wintertime after I decide to call it quits on the day job and semi-retire? Probably not. There's other things that go on in Puerto Rico that are just cause you to shake your head. Some of them controllable, some of them not. Everything you read says, you know what, this is the United States. You can drink the water because the rules are you got to keep your water at a certain up to a certain quality if you're in the United States. It's a territory. By law, they have to do it. Well, guess what? Sometimes they don't. So much of what you read says, you know what? You're best served to not drink the water in Puerto Rico. Again, where we were, you could walk just fine. However, you get outside of the area where we're at, and it's not quite so safe. It's like any place else, but even more so. And then there's the hurricanes. What happens every now and then in tropical paradise is a hurricane comes. Now, is there going to be a hurricane that comes while we're there in January or February? No. Hurricanes don't hit that part of the world that time of year. So while we're there, it's fine. However, in the west of the country, when they had a hurricane that hit, about 8 months ago, they still haven't rebuilt from that yet. So these hurricanes can be truly devastating. And when a hurricane hits and you don't have money to rebuild, well, you can imagine what happens with the infrastructure. Bottom line is, I'm not complaining. Anytime you go someplace out of the country, even though it's out of the country with an asterisk, because Puerto Rico, you use U.S. dollars and you can use your phone just fine. And it's just like being on vacation. Now, the one thing I will tell you about Puerto Rico, you better know some Spanish, because they say, the statistics I heard were that about 80% of the people that live in Puerto Rico do not speak English very well. I wouldn't say with where we were, I wouldn't say it was 80%. I will say, in speaking with some people in restaurants, and virtually all the people in the hotel, as far as housekeeping goes, they did not speak English very well. Put it this way, my Spanish was better than their English, so we spoke in Spanish. Now, that was good, because I was actually able to communicate in Spanish. Our Uber drivers, especially the one we talked to, he just flat out, he apologized. He said, basically in broken English or broken Spanish, half English, half Spanish. Basically, he said, look, I'm sorry, but I don't speak English. That was fine. We spoke Spanish to him on the way to the hotel, which was fine, because he understood what we were saying, and we could understand what he was saying. We just, you tell the guy, if someone's speaking Spanish and they speak it too fast, you say, lentamente, por favor, slowly, please. And they know that, okay, I'll slow it down and I'll not use the $12 words. So they keep the words simple. They speak slowly. We understand them just fine. I'm sure that we did not conjugate verbs properly, but they always knew what we said. I ordered my food in Spanish. We gave them directions. In Spanish, we had conversation about the area, sports, that type of thing. Simple stuff. We were able to carry on a conversation. But if you're going to spend time in Puerto Rico, you're best served to speak some Spanish, at least basic Spanish. It's very, very helpful. Bottom line is, if you're looking for a nice place to relax with a little bit of culture and great Caribbean food, because you better like Caribbean food, because that's about all you're going to get there, Puerto Rico's the place to go. If you're looking for some place that's going to be just like suburban St. Louis, but with 85-degree weather, forget it. You're not going to like it at all. So there's my report on our Puerto Rican adventure. Adventure number 1 of the 3 adventures of a lifetime. What are the other 2, you ask? Well, we've already got the trip planned for the European River Tour in July. I also have a trip booked to Death Valley in April. And that's my annual trip that was skipped last year because there was a lot going on. But I've already got one of the trips in the can, 2 of the trips planned. So looks like I'm going to get my adventure of a lifetime at least 3 times a year. Part 2 of the podcast I want to talk about, and it's a whole mind your own garden, or mind your garden. And it was an editorial I read by Faye Vincent. And it was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was interesting. I think Faye Vincent, that guy used to be the commissioner of baseball about 30 or 40 years ago. And that's exactly what he was. I've heard nothing from him since then. But he's an older guy now. He's 85. He said, look, I'm 85 years old. This is what I was, but this is what I am. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this only because, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, the demographics of this show, probably 25% of the people who listen to the show are under 50, if I can believe the Spreaker demographics that I get from them, okay? So 25% under 50. The other 75% over 50. Some a bit over 50, some a whole lot over 50, some a whole lot over 50, which is fine. But I think what happens to people as they get older, and at least I can speak for myself as I get older. In fact, the trophy wife, even she never misses an opportunity to kick me in the crotch when she can. But I had mentioned about, me being middle-aged, and, it's tough to be middle-aged. And she looked at me, she says, you haven't been middle-aged for quite some time. You're an old man. Okay, well, she's not wrong. 63, I think, is officially old, but is middle-aged 40 to 60, something like that? Some people say 40 to 60, some say 45 to 55. When you're over 60, you're not middle-aged anymore, okay? And as I get older, and I think as I speak to people, many, if not most people feel the same way. But as I get older, I look at how things are changing. Because remember, things always change. There's nothing different about that. Things have always changed. And the boomers have ruled the roost. When I was a young man, the greatest generation ruled the roost. As it changed over to the boomers ruling the roost, things changed. And the greatest generation people that I grew up, that were my mentors, the people who held my hand, the people who showed me how to do things. They would make statements like, well, I'm sure glad I lived when I lived, or man, times are sure changing. I scratched my head. Well, just adapt, dope. It's not that hard. Well, as you get older, I'm not going to say it's hard, but you look at adapting, you think to yourself, you know what? I don't want to adapt to that because I'm not buying in. I'm not buying in on what they're selling. The rock ain't smelling what you're cooking, or something along those lines. I got that wrong too. But things just change, okay? And they always change, but they change where you scratch your head. And I have to think that many think the way I do. Many of my older listeners, perhaps some of my younger listeners. Perhaps I'm wrong. Send me an email and let me know if I'm right or wrong. But a few stories that were in the news this week. There were two stories, and they had to do with baseball. And I heard them on two different sources. And I'm surprised that I've still to date heard nobody linking these two stories together, because it's obvious to me. The one story is our play-by-play announcer, Dan McLaughlin. He's not the play-by-play guy anymore. He just had his third DUI, and that's it. He was, they say he was through a mutual agreement. He's not working for them anymore. Let's be honest. He was fired. He was probably allowed to resign. Okay. Whether you think that's fair or not, doesn't matter. He's not the play-by-play guy anymore. So they need a new one. The headlines while we were down in Puerto Rico said Chip Caray, the son-in-law of Harry Caray, is to be the new Cardinal announcer. I think that was made Sunday or Monday of this week. In fact, if you go to the Cardinal website, it says Chip Caray to be the new Cardinal play-by-play guy. Parentheses, sources. In other words, they're not saying this is the case. They're saying somebody said. If you read these stories, nobody is saying this is true. This has happened. Nobody has made an announcement. The announcements have been like, man, you know what? Chip Caray says, it's going to be nice to work in St. Louis, okay? They've had no press conference. They've had no intro to the new guy. There's been no firm, as of 8:30 on Saturday morning, there has been no news. Put it this way, as of 7 o'clock Saturday morning, that's when I started reading the news, there was no announcement of Chip Caray being the play-by-play guy. But you think to yourself, well, why wouldn't they just make the announcement if he's the guy? Well, that has to do with part 2 of this story. If you watch a baseball game on television, in fact, this is for most markets for Major League Baseball and hockey and basketball, to a lesser degree football as well. But you watch it on Bally Sports. Used to be Fox Sports, okay? Fox Sports was bought by Bally Sports, okay? And that's Sinclair Broadcasting. Well, funny that, and baseball teams make tons of money off of their television revenue. Many teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, if they drew 0 people into their stadiums, I mean, when you compare the amount of revenue they get from their television deal to what they get from their stadium deal, it's a rounding error. But even teams like the Cardinals, who do rely on attendance, they get $66 million a year from Bally Sports to show the games, which is why you don't have games. You have the blackout games. You got to get their stupid sports package, and you got to go through the cable company to get it. Well, guess what's happening with cable companies? People are cutting the cord. In other words, Bally Sports is getting less money all the time from cable subscribers. But they still have to pay the Cardinals $66 million a year. So what happens to a company when expenses exceed income? That's right. They file for bankruptcy, which is what's happening. Word on the street says that's what's happening with Bally Sports, with Sinclair, with, I think they call it Diamond Sports Group is the actual name of it, which is a subsidiary of Sinclair Broadcasting. So I don't think Sinclair per se is filing for bankruptcy, but the Diamond Sports Group of Sinclair Broadcasting is going to file for bankruptcy. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you file for bankruptcy, the court says who gets paid what. Okay, and the court can say, yeah, I know the contract says that the St. Louis Cardinals get $66 million, but they're not going to get that. In fact, the deal is now null and void. Or as soon as they file bankruptcy, the deal will be null and void. So legally, they don't have to pay them anything. They do if they broadcast the show, but it won't be $66 million, okay? And a lot of these other companies, baseball teams, are the same way. They've signed all these big name contracts, and they're going to lose tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue, which maybe the Cardinals knew that was going to happen, which is why they didn't spend all this money on these free agents, okay? Which maybe they're smarter than your average bear. But here's the thing. Let's get back to Chip Caray. Why hasn't Chip Caray signed this contract? Well, because Chip Caray doesn't work for the Cardinals, remember. Chip Caray works for Bally Sports, or will work for Bally Sports. And if he signs a contract, if he walks away from his contract in Atlanta, because he's currently a play-by-play guy in Atlanta, if he walks away from that contract, signs a new one, and then Bally's files for bankruptcy, that contract is null and void too. So there's no need for him to sign a contract. Because if he does, and Bally's files for bankruptcy, it's null and void. So that's why Chip Caray hasn't announced, or Bally's or the Cardinals or Chip Caray haven't announced, yep, I am the guy, let's have a press conference. Because I don't think that's happened, and it may not happen at all. And that's something I've been talking about for years, and I've scratched my head for years. These baseball teams, it's all about the money. Now, I get it. It's a business, and business is always all about the money. I get that, okay? But baseball is different. Sports are different. Case in point, the football playoffs were on over the weekend. And when we came home from dinner, Puerto Rico's 2 hours ahead of Central Time. So they're Atlantic time. So when it's 5 p.m. in St. Louis, it's 7 p.m. in Puerto Rico, okay? So we come home from dinner, and the football games are on. They're on right there in the bar. So it was, well, you know what? We've had enough of the bar. We've had our happy hour. We've had dinner. We've had enough to drink. We've had enough of sun. Let's go upstairs, put our feet up, because you can't put your feet up in a bar. put our feet up, relax, watch the football game upstairs in our room. You couldn't get it. And we had Fox Sports 1. We had ESPN. Now, maybe it was a Puerto Rico thing. I don't know. The major networks, they showed Spanish language programs. Okay. The terrestrial TV that you also get on the cable. But the football games were not to be found. Baseball's the same way. If you don't have Bally Sports, you're not watching a Cardinal game. Now they say, well, you just subscribe to the MLB app. Well, no. If you subscribe to the MLB app, you can see every game you want in St. Louis, except for the Cardinals. It's blacked out. So Major League Baseball has gone all in with the money, because basically Bally said, look, we'll give you $66 million a year, but we'll decide who watches your stupid game. They said, $66 million, that's great. We couldn't get that on our own. Sold. Who cares if people can't watch the game? Who cares if things were blacked out? Who cares if the kids don't watch baseball anymore? That's okay. We get our $66 million a year. Or not. Now, word on the street is, here's what they're going to do. Bally's is going to file for bankruptcy. Then the Major League Baseball teams are going to buy the rights back from Bally's and produce their own programs to broadcast games like they used to do. Okay, that's what's going to happen. Word on the street is that's what's going to happen. Friends, today is January the 28th. Pitchers and catchers report to spring training in 3 weeks. When is this going to happen? How quickly can they put this together? Is this, where are they going to watch this? There's no contract signed. There's no people signed. Do you take the old people? Fine. Do you have to build studios? Or do you use their studios? Well, you probably have to buy that too. Are you going to get $66 million a year in revenue? No, nothing close. So what they're going to have to do is spend a bunch of money to get a whole bunch less. And that's what happens when you put money before the customer. And again, this has never made sense to me. I've predicted this for years, and now it's happened. And I don't get it, and I can't fix it. And it has become so bad and gotten so worse every year, where once upon a time when I was a young man, I lived and died with baseball. Okay. Now, if it's on and it's entertaining, I'll watch it. But not very often, because I've found other things to do. I'm minding my own garden and letting the baseball people do whatever they want to do. Another thing that causes me to scratch my head, and reading in the papers this morning, they're talking about how these restaurants are wanting to go to all carry out. In other words, all you don't go in and dine anymore. And we're talking more of the fast food restaurants, the McDonald's, the Chipotle, the Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken, places I don't really eat anyway. But they say that, they can't find people, so they're going to order on the app or order on a kiosk. You just go up. A conveyor belt even maybe brings your food out. You pick it up and you leave. You never interact with a person. Maybe you never go into a store. That's the model these people want. And here's the thing that I laughed out loud, and I don't even understand why they're even thinking this way or said this. Here's the big problem that they have. And I think this was a spokesman for the Yum Group. And Yum, they do Taco Bell and Kentucky Fried Chicken, a couple other fast food places. They say, we want to go to a model where the customer orders on the app or at a kiosk, and the food comes out and is delivered to him on a conveyor belt, and they take it and eat it someplace else. But we also want to make sure that the customer understands that we care about him and we give him service, and he has a positive thought about the people who are serving him. It's laughable. Your goal is to have no people involved, but they still want you to smile and think, oh, the people that work here are great. No, you got two people, one in the back dumping fries, one in the back grilling burgers. You can't have it both ways, folks. And the other thing that makes me scratch my head is because they believe that people want to eat their food someplace else. Now, if I go to a restaurant, I want to eat it in the restaurant. I don't want to eat it someplace else. What does someplace else mean? Someplace else means one of two places, okay? You're either going to take it home or take it back to work, sit it, and open it up, and it's going to be cold. And to me, I have to be on my third day of not eating before I eat cold McDonald's hamburgers and French fries. I don't like it to begin with. If I'm starving to death, I'll eat it if it's hot. If it's cold, I personally don't even think it's food. It's something other than that. But that's option number one, to eat that swill cold. Option number two, you eat it in your car. Friends, I know a lot of people do that because I've been in a lot of people's cars, and most people's cars are pig holes. I don't eat in my car. I love my cars. I'm not going to destroy my cars with French fries and onions and all this stuff and make them stink and grease up the seats. In a rental car, if you ever drive a rental car next time, as you're sitting in the seat of a rental car, look down between your legs, and the seat's stained with grease because people eat in the rental cars. That's how most people eat. A lot of people eat in their cars. I don't do that. Cars to me are like my pets, okay? Some people love their dogs. Some people love their cats. I love my cars. I'm not going to eat in my car. But again, I'm in the minority by far. It's not even close. Most younger people that I see eat in their cars or they eat cold food at their desk at work. I don't get that. But then again, they're not catering to me. I need to mind my own garden. And that's how I stay out of the psychiatrist's couch, okay? By just saying, you know what? This is the way things are going. I don't like it, but that's okay. I don't have to participate. I don't have to go to Chipotle and order food and eat it in my car or eat it cold at home. Last night I went to Aldi, which I love Aldi. Okay, I bought a nice piece of salmon for $10. Grilled that salmon, smoked it with cherry wood on the grill, seasoned it with salt, pepper, kosher salt, rosemary for my garden, and some Old Bay seasoning. It was wonderful. And for $10, we got enough salmon for me and the trophy wife to have dinner, and enough left over for me to have lunch the next day or sometime next week. It'll be my lunch for $10. That's how I opt to eat. I'm not going to your stupid restaurant and eating in my car or bringing it home and eating it cold in my house. It's not food. It's something just to make your stomach to stop growling. And again, I understand that this stuff is not pointed at me. And dear listeners, especially those of you that are older, they don't give two shakes about you either. But that's okay. They don't want your money. You're not going to give it to them. They don't want my money. That's okay, because I'm not going to give it to them anyway. What am I going to do in my spare time? Instead, I'll simply mind my own garden. Well, that's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Go ahead and send me an email. I will send you a link to the podcast, and you can download it and listen to it at your leisure. Or I'm on Podcaster. That's Brad Hildebrand's new venture, PODCASTRR, podcaster.com. It's a radio station. It's a website. Just plug into podcaster.com, and there's a podcast playing. It might even be mine, because I'm one of the people that are on Podcaster. Or Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Spotify, you name it, I'm on it. Well, that's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.